And so here's the second question, though. If the purpose of the church is to make disciples, what is a disciple? You got three things there, but don't look at your. Don't see if you can give me one of them without looking at it. Some of you've already cheated. It's okay. All right, all right. There's three aspects to being a disciple. What's one of them? What's something you heard last week, even if it's not one of the ones? What is a disciple? The follower of Jesus. So it's somebody who says Jesus is my leader, and I'm going to follow him. Okay. So being a Christian doesn't just mean, I know a lot of people who I would say are not Christians, but they have good feelings about Jesus. He's a good guy. Yeah, he had some good teachings. But it's more than that. He becomes my ultimate. He becomes my everything. I'm following him. So he might have me work at the same place, but I no longer work because of my reasons. I want the money, or I work because I'm afraid of my boss or whatever. But now I go in there and I do that work because I'm believing that's what Jesus wants me to do, and I'm going to work in such a way that I'm honoring Jesus. Jesus is the boss behind my boss and over my boss in everything. That happens in every area of our family. So another aspect is, you can read this one if you want. What's the second one there? Not only do I follow Jesus, but I'm being changed by Jesus. If you met Jesus, if you're following him, and there's been no life change, didn't meet Jesus. I don't know what happened, but it wasn't Jesus. I know this firsthand. Now, he's still changing us, okay? So, none of us perfect right away. There are some things he touched in our life right away, changed in our life right away, and then changes, continue to make us. And in fact, in everything we do in our life, we stop and go, is this what Jesus would do? Is this how Jesus would be? Am I being like him? If not, I need to respond to him because still need to be changed by him. This is going to show up in our homes. This is going to show up in our it's going to show up in how we do church. It's going to show up in all those environments. And there should be a big difference. It should be like, that I'm at church now. I was acting like I do when I'm at home or I'm at work. We really should be being changed in all those environments, so there's not a lot of difference. There's different environments, but we're still being the same person. He's in our not heart. I'm becoming like him. I was gonna pick on Ed a little bit, but actually kind of highlight him. So a group of 15 of us went and played paintball yesterday, and I think me and Clint were the older statesmen there, right, Clint? Yeah, the statesmen. That's what we'll go with. We said next time we go, we're going to be like the generals in the tents behind the battleground, directing things, and let the privates go out there and do the actual work of things. And so we played, and by the way, if you notice this scar on my neck, okay, it's Ed did that, okay, and so I don't know what kind of sin it is when you shoot your pastor in the neck, but he did it, and he knows he did it, and right now he's still proud of it, so he's not repentant of that. And so pray for him that he will feel some guilt and remorse over that. And I got some other scars as well, but you got to start taking clothes off to see some of those, so we're not going to do that. But we had a good time out there. But actually what I was thinking back, there's a group of us there. We ate at Denny's afterwards, and just kind of decompressing afterwards, telling the battle stories all over again. What were you thinking when you were over there, and having a good time. And I was just kind of looking around there, and I was thinking, I don't know everybody in the group. We had some there that I don't know really well, but there was at least 3 of the people in the group, and I was like, I remember when they trusted Jesus as their Savior. I remember when they first started following Jesus. Ed's one of those. And I remember talking, and Ed and I have talked about this in the past, but there was one time where before Ed had really trusted Jesus, he was kind of on the fence. When I first met him, man, he was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need Jesus. He just thought he was good, and he wasn't, but he thought he was. And I remember there was one conversation we were having when I think God was starting to turn his heart a little bit, and he mentioned that that his son wanted to be like him, but it was in something that wasn't good. And it was like, man, I need God to change me in that area. And it has changed him in that area. In fact, like, it's become so natural. Like, I don't even know if he realizes it, but I remember, like, when he was still, following Jesus, but would have been standoffish. And I've seen him now be one of the leaders of a group in his home. And yesterday, when we started to have prayer for the dinner, we were kind of at 4 different tables. Our group kind of divided up. We were all in one little section over there, took over that corner of Denny's. And normally, when we're in a setting like that, and, we say, how are we going to pray? And everybody turns and looks at me. Yeah. I don't know how people pray for their meals if they don't have a pastor around sometimes. Because, like, when we're together, but I guess it's like, well, we can't pray like you would, but you can. But anyway, so they don't. But this time, like, before we could even go there, I was kind of expecting it to go there. Or Pastor Clint was there, so I thought, well, maybe it'll get him. But, like, right away, it was like, hey, I'll pray. And he just, boom, right there in public, out loud, whole corner of the restaurant, just prayed. But it was natural. Like, he wasn't trying to show off anything. But what hit me was, it's like 5 years ago, that wasn't it. But now it was just like flowing out of him. Jesus was changing him, and it's amazing what God is doing in him. And those of you who know Jesus and are following Jesus, there's changes. There's things that have happened where he's working on you. All right, one more thing. A disciple is somebody following Jesus. It's somebody who's being changed by Jesus. And then the third one is, go ahead and you can read it. It's okay. I'm making disciples of Jesus. I'm making disciples. He's using me to bring others to himself. And how do you know if you're being successful at being a disciple of Jesus? What's one of the big criteria that you can tell? Hey, you remember that. You got grandchildren, spiritual grandchildren. The disciples, the people you're helping bring to Jesus, they're bringing others to Jesus. So that means even after you bring your one to Jesus, you're not really done yet. You're not all the way there until you're seeing them reach out to somebody. So you're going to help your spiritual children have spiritual grandchildren. Okay? That's what we're about. Now, that's a lifelong mission, guys. All right? We are constantly learning to follow Jesus. There's a moment when we weren't even trying to follow Jesus, and we really began to follow him, but we'll stumble and bumble, and we'll have to. Oh, Jesus is my boss. I forgot about that. Jesus is my leader. I got to follow him. Well, Jesus changes us the first time we met him, but he's going to keep changing us. There's still things in our life that need to go. We're going to be trying to make a disciple of the one and help that one make a disciple, and then we're going to recognize that, man, there's somebody else that needs to know Jesus. And so this is what we're about the rest of our life. This is what our church needs to be about. Okay? So I want to review this. We're going to keep coming back to this. What's the purpose of the church? Make disciples. What is a disciple? I follow Jesus. I'm changed by Jesus, and I make other disciples of Jesus. How to know we're being successful? Are we seeing spiritual children and grandchildren? Okay? That's how we're going to know this as we move forward here. Now, I want to just stop and pause because we've had the scripture read and we got this in our minds, and I want to stop and just pause and say, God, all right, what's next today? What do I need to focus on next in this disciple-making process? Okay? Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for how you're working in our hearts. Lord, I'm just amazed just even last week as I saw all the prayer requests, it was like the tone had changed. And you had put so many people in our hearts. And, wow, what are you doing, Lord? You're helping us be focused on the things that really matter. So help us again, Lord. And I know some of us, we've been praying for somebody. We want to reach out to them. And now you're starting to cause us to wonder, what do I do next? So help us as we consider that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Yeah, last week as I saw your connection cards, I remember thinking, wow, this is one of the best group of prayer requests ever. Pastor J.D. Greer asked this question. He says, what if God answered every one of your prayer requests in the last 7 days with a resounding yes? How would that be? Now, most of us initially we go, well, that'd be awesome, But what exactly did we pray for in the last 7 days? Maybe the car broke down and that got fixed. Or maybe somebody was in the hospital and they got healed. And, those are some good things. We should pray for those things. There's really nothing that we can't take to Jesus. But, there are times in our life where there are things even bigger than that. There are people's lives, people's eternal destinies at heart. And sometimes we might go a week or longer and we haven't prayed for those things. And so one of the things that reason he was asking this question was that these things ought to always be on the top of our list. We ought to always be praying for that one. We ought to always be reaching out. And what if God started touching those prayer requests and answering those things? Just this last week, I know at least 3 of you who prayed for one. I saw something happen during this last week. And one of the things I was praying about, I was saying, God, I've been praying for my neighbors. I've got this thing that's telling me, my neighbors' names and how I can pray for them each day. And I've been doing this for months now. And I remember literally thinking last week, God, I feel like you're telling me that my next step is to go tell my neighbors that I'm praying for them. And I remember feeling like, I really want to do that. I can just pray for them, that's right. But I felt like, God, tell me to do, okay, I need to do this. But then I was thinking, well, which neighbor should I do this for first? And as I was still kind of contemplating that, I was outside early in the week, and I was getting ready to warm up for a run, and doing some of my stretches and some of my warm-up stuff there. And normally my neighbors are gone because they've got jobs taken up in North Virginia, and they're out earlier. And one of my neighbors next door, all of a sudden he's walking around. I said, oh, you're off today. And he goes, yeah, I was off today. And he's telling me about his girl who isn't normally with him. She's normally with her mom, is with him. I didn't even know he had an 8-year-old daughter. And it was her first day of school. This was Wednesday, okay? And so we just chatted for a few minutes, and all of a sudden I heard God just saying to me, well, ask him if you want to pray for me. So I said, hey, I've been praying for you guys and for other neighbors here for a long time. And I said, how can I pray for you today? What's on your heart? And he said, and he gave the name of his daughter. He said, first day of school, she's moved in from a new area. She's been with her mom. Her mom's going to the military. We haven't been together that much. She's moved in the area. I'm kind of nervous about all those things. That's why I took a day off of work for that. I said, okay. And I think, man, I wouldn't even have known that. And often I would have plowed into my run. Like, I can't talk about it right now. I'm in the run mode. I got to do this. And God helped me do that. That's just one little step. And some of you prayed, and God's already done some things this current week. And so I want to ask you to continue to do that. So you might be asking yourself this question, how do I make a disciple? So first I want us to focus on a passage that we wouldn't normally think of as a how-to. In Matthew 13, we read about the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure. Now, when you think kingdom of heaven, one of the things that when you see that term is God's not talking about kingdom of heaven like this is where you go when you die. He's talking about kingdom of heaven. It's like God's administration, God's work. God basically, his kingdom is already active, and he's inviting people into it. And so people get to sign up to be with him, and his work, his power, his agenda is being accomplished all over the world. So that's more what you want to think of about the kingdom of heaven. So he's telling you what God is like. He's telling you how you get in on that, how it's spreading, how it's expanding. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure buried in a field that a man found and reburied. Okay? And in his joy, he goes and sells everything he has and buys that field. And so somehow this guy stumbled onto some treasure. Doesn't tell us what it is. Maybe he found some gold that was buried somewhere. But it was, maybe he was, in that day, sometimes they had sheep that would wander around, and maybe he accidentally stumbled on some treasure while his sheep were in somebody else's territory. And so he doesn't talk about the ethics of this, but he's just saying they realized how valuable this was. And so they recognized, whoops, this isn't mine, but it could be mine. Let's rebury it, and I need to purchase this field. Now, this guy didn't go out thinking he was going to be a landowner. Most of the people in that day did not own their own land. They did not have a lot of territory. So to purchase this land was crazy hard. We don't know how much money he had to come up with, but he sold, so the only way he could do it was to sell everything he currently had. Now, I'm guessing here, but like maybe the guy had 10 sheep, okay? Not a whole lot of sheep. You see, he just had a few things. And normally he would need the wool from that sheep. He would, need one at a time and need some lambs later on to give him, to grow the flock and to occasionally have one of them to have some meat here and there. So he needed that to continue. He takes them all to market and sells them right now. When you sell everything you have and you're a farmer, you're in this kind of setting, that's risky, isn't it? But he buys this field and he's glad to do it. Why? Because he knows in that field, I buy this, I get this treasure, everything else doesn't matter. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. And when he found one priceless pearl, he went and sold everything he had and bought it. I want us to be thinking about that. We've been talking about like who's your one, as in who should you reach out to, but today I want to take that a different direction. I want you to be thinking about in your life, what or who is your one? What is your life centered around? I've seen times where people would try to improve their life, and so they had like their circle, and they made a little pie, like that was their life, and they divided up little slices of it. So they had like work as a slice, family as a slice, your marriage as a slice, okay? Have all these little things going around it, and one of those slices would be your spiritual life or your relationship with God. I don't really like that picture because what it does is it kind of makes us feel like that these are all relatively equal compartments and components of our life. And that's not really true. A better picture is this. I saw another one where it was like a wheel with spokes around it, and so right in the middle, a circle in the middle was God. And then they had slices with like little spokes going around it that had work, home, health, finances, all these other things going around it. And the idea is that whatever's in the center is propelling all these things, is fueling all these things, and is number one. And if God is doing it is in the middle, that's going to help all these other areas be what they should be. Now the problem is though, is that most of us, we know God should be in the middle, but really, if somebody could ask us and say, what does she love more than anything? What does she talk about more than anything? What is his focus more than anything? Really, for most of us, how many of us, the answer, the verdict would be, if we had a jury of our peers would say, his life is all about, what would they say? What would they fill it in with? Now, they could be wrong. Sometimes our peers could be wrong. But I think, honestly, we know that it's not always, God isn't always our center. There's so many other things we chase. Sometimes we start chasing after money. Sometimes we just want a certain relationship to work out. Sometimes we want our work, our career to be everything. And so there's different things that we move to the center, and everything else funnels from those things. And the question is what is or who is your one? What is it? For some of you, it's your control over life. As long as you've got life happening the way you want it to, and you're calling the shots, it's all good. Who is your one? What is your one? We all have something in that middle that's controlling everything, and it defines our life. It makes it everything that it is. What is your one? In John chapter 1, we read this. It says, it talks about John. This John right here is John the Baptist. This is not John, later one of the disciples. It's not the John who wrote the Gospel of John. It's this John the Baptist. He was standing with two of his disciples. So I want you to understand something, because sometimes we see disciples and we automatically think disciples of Jesus. But John the Baptist was a teacher, a prophet, and so in that Jewish tradition, he had two apprentices. He had two followers. He had two people who were trying to be just like John the Baptist. And it says that when John the Baptist saw Jesus passing by, he looked and he pointed to him and he goes, "Look, there is the Lamb of God." Lamb of God. What does that mean? Well, often in Jewish culture, the Lamb of God was a sacrifice. It was offered at Passover to cover over their wrongdoing so that they could be right with God. And so often they offered a lamb as a sacrifice, but he said capital L, Lamb of God. That's who Jesus is. He's going to take care of the sins of the world. And something in the way that he pointed at him and said this, the two disciples of John the Baptist went, that guy is really important to our leader. In fact, he's so important to our leader. Normally, a disciple always stayed with their leader and mimicked him, whatever he did. They left John the Baptist and went after him, but in doing so, they were actually still following what John was, because they could tell by the way John was reacting about Jesus that he thinks this guy is more important even than himself. And so they start following Jesus. Now, when they say follow Jesus here, it means literally. Jesus was walking down the road, and they literally are following him. They're stalking him, okay? In fact, it's so obvious that they're following him, and they must have, they would stop and he would stop and, look around, and they were following him because it says Jesus turned and noticed them following him. You ever been, doing something, you notice, I have a shadow. Somebody's following me. So Jesus noticed them following him, and he says, what are you looking for? Why are you stalking me? What's up? And so they just, he called us, so let's tell him. Teacher, where are you staying? Well, come and you'll see. In other words, they were like, John said, this guy's really amazing. I want to check him. So they were following him throughout his day. But then they're like, we want to see where you live. We want to see what kind of person you are. And so they just tell him that. And Jesus says, well, come, let's see. So he shows them where he was staying. And they stayed with him that day. And it was about 4 in the afternoon. Like, this stuck in these disciples' minds here that they had done this. And they just hung out with Jesus. And so their first indication that Jesus was somebody special was that John the Baptist pointed him out. And so then they just started literally following Jesus. And they probably peppered him with questions. They asked him all kinds of things here. And it says, and Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard John. So when we get to the 12 disciples, you're going to recognize some of these names. Andrew was one of the disciples of Jesus later on. And so, but he's one you hardly ever hear about. Okay? Most of you, I'd say, tell me something about Andrew. He was a disciple of Jesus. What else? I don't know. And you're right. We don't know a lot about him. Andrew started off being a disciple of John the Baptist. And because of John the Baptist pointing at Jesus this day, he left John the Baptist and started following Jesus. But look at what he does. It says, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard John and followed him. He first found his own brother Simon, and Simon's another name for this is Peter that you recognize in the Bible, and told him, we have found the Messiah, which is translated to Christ. The word Christ means anointed one. It's not Jesus' name. Jesus, his last name isn't Christ. Okay, it's a title. So when you see Jesus Christ, it's Jesus is the Messiah is a way of saying that. Okay, and so not everybody believes that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the Messiah. But he's saying Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one who's going to be the king of our nation. He's going to set us free. He didn't understand everything about the Messiah. None of the Jews did. None of us know what it means really for Jesus to save us. Even when we come to him, we have a tiny picture. But he knew Jesus is the one. He knew that Jesus was it. He'd been following John the Baptist, and he was learning a lot of cool things. But all of a sudden, he realized everything that John the Baptist has been talking about has been pointing at Jesus. Jesus really is the one. John the Baptist is a good guy. He's the one who led me to Jesus, but Jesus is the one. And he was so convinced of this that he goes and gets his brother, and he brought Simon to Jesus. He brings Peter to Jesus. You say, how did Peter meet Jesus? His brother introduced him to him. How long had Andrew been following Jesus? You can tell me. I'm asking. Look at the text. It tells you everything that I know right there. What did you say, Linda? A day. A day. Maybe not even a whole day. Like that afternoon, hung out with Jesus. Next day, he's like, Peter, bro, we got to go. I found the Messiah. And he brings Peter to Jesus. Now, some of you might be saying, well, wait a minute. I thought last week we looked at a story where Jesus walked by some fishermen, and Peter was one of them, and he said, hey, come and follow me. And you're right. Okay, that did happen. But what you have to realize is when Jesus did that to Peter, that wasn't the first time Peter had met Jesus. This was the first time that Peter met Jesus. So in other words, he had some interactions with Jesus, and sometime after those interactions, Jesus says to Peter, hey, come follow me. Come be my disciple. And he comes and he follows him. So it wasn't like an on-the-spot decision. He had encountered Jesus. And so here's the first thought I want to give you out of this. Is when you say, how do I make a disciple? One of the things we see here, things that you can keep in mind, is that multiple encounters with Jesus led to the first disciples becoming convinced that Jesus was the one. How did they become convinced that Jesus was the one? They encountered Jesus multiple times. In Peter's case, he had a relative who told him about Jesus. In Andrew's case, he had a teacher named John the Baptist who first pointed him to Jesus. But both of them went and met Jesus personally and hung out with him. And then later on, we find that Peter wasn't just a bystander hanging out and meeting Jesus and knew his name, but Jesus walks by and says, okay, Peter, come follow me. I'm going to make you a fisher of men. And Peter becomes a disciple, but there were multiple encounters with Jesus. Okay? So one of the things I want to share with you here is sometimes we're thinking that, man, it's all going to happen in this one thing. There's going to be multiple encounters. How many times did you hear the gospel before you said yes to Jesus? For me personally, I have no idea. I think probably hundreds. I grew up in church. I was in church I got to look at this again. I got confused. I might have been born on a Sunday. I'm trying to remember now. So I wasn't in church that day, okay? And I may not have been the following Sunday, but within 2 weeks of my life, I was in church. And I was in one of those families. We went to church Sunday morning, not just for this service, but we had a Sunday school hour before that, and then we went to morning service, and then we had an evening service, and then we had a Wednesday night service, okay? And occasionally we had revivals that were all week long in the evenings, and then I went to the Christian day school that was there Monday through Friday. So when I say I was in church 6-7 days a week, I'm not exaggerating, okay? I heard the gospel a lot, okay? But you know what? I was 15 years of age until all of a sudden I realized this is my culture. Jesus hasn't been my Savior. I thought, if you'd asked me, and if God had been honest with you, who was in the center, who was the one, what was the one in the middle of my life, it would have been me. I'm in charge. Jesus was a component of my life. He wasn't my one. I was doing what I wanted to do, and all of a sudden when I got to be 15 and some things happened in my life, all of a sudden I realized I'm not adequate to be the one. I need somebody else. And I finally realized, wow, I've been hearing about this Jesus. I know about him, but I need to know him. And so finally I said yes to Jesus. I don't even know how many hundreds of times I heard about Jesus. What about you? In your life, how many times did you hear about Jesus? Maybe there's somebody here that you heard one time, first time ever, and you responded to Jesus. But I think for most of us, multiple encounters with Jesus took us till we became convinced that Jesus was the one. Some of you maybe not even there yet, okay? I recognize that in almost every church service, we got somebody that you're not there yet. You're still having some of those encounters. We're praying that you will come to discover Jesus as the one, okay? But why is this helpful to keep in mind? Well, as you're making disciples, you might have that first conversation with a friend, a family member, and share the gospel, and they might not respond well, okay? We hear here that Andrew brought Simon to Jesus, but Simon doesn't yet become a follower of Jesus. Not yet. He met Jesus. It led to him later responding to Jesus' call in his life, but multiple encounters with Jesus is what it took, okay? Now let's keep going here. Let's keep reading here. It says, he went down, and so he brings Simon to Jesus, and boy, a good conversation here. When Jesus saw him, he said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. what's interesting is that when somebody meets Jesus, he changes their identity. In this case, he changed Simon's name. He gave him a whole new identity. And so that's really significant here. But let's keep reading here. It says, the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. And when he went to Galilee, he found Philip and told him, follow me. How many of you knew Philip was a disciple of Jesus? Okay? Don't fake it. Just, did you know Philip was one of the disciples of Jesus? All right? So those of you who were so brave, Philip was a disciple of Jesus, put you on the spot here. Tell me something about Philip. What do you know about Philip? What's he known for? He's like Andrew, right? It's like, not much. He's a disciple of Jesus. I don't remember. Okay? Here's something you'll know him for after we read this. Look at this. This is so cool. Jesus walked up to him and he said, Philip, follow me. Now, it probably, if it was like the other conversations, it wasn't the first time Philip had met him. But on this case, he is saying, hey, Philip, come follow me. And remember last week we talked about when Jesus made disciples? That was a trademark in their culture when the master teacher said, hey, I want you. I choose you. He's saying, I want you to be my apprentice. I want you to be my disciple. You're going to come live with me. You're going to learn to be just like me. So this wasn't a just, hey, I'm walking down this trail. Why don't you walk with me a little bit? Follow me. No, he's saying, be my disciple. That's what this meant. So that's a significant thing, right? If somebody walks up to you and just says, I have a new job offer for you, and they're literally planning to hire you, that's not on the level of this, but that's not an innocent conversation, right? That's a big deal. That's a change. This is bigger than that, and he says, Philip, follow me. Well, it doesn't tell us what Philip did next, but you can tell what he did because it says, now Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. So maybe Philip had heard about it from Andrew and Peter. We don't know that for sure, but maybe. And then it says, Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and so did the prophets, Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. When he's saying the one Moses wrote about in the law, he's saying, this is the Messiah. We have found the one. I have found the one that my whole life should be based on. This is the guy. Now you have to realize this Messiah prophecy that was in the law had been there for the Israelites for thousands of years. Can you imagine having a 1,000-year-old prophecy and you're saying, oh my goodness, I know the fulfillment of that. I know the guy. I know the one who's supposed to do this. This is significant. And his friend said, praise Jesus, let me come. How did his friend react? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? He had a hard question. Some of you last week, when we wrote down, who's your one, you put down your one, we said, what's going to be your obstacle? And you said, a lot of you said this, there's hard questions that I don't know the answers to, right? I mean, that's real. That's an obstacle we have. By the way, I'll just tell you this. I know some of the answers to some of the hard questions, but as a pastor, there's a lot of hard questions I still don't know the answers to, okay? And if you wait until you get all of the answers to the hard questions, you will never be a witness for Jesus because you don't know all the answers. In fact, hardly a week goes by that I don't encounter somebody who comes to me thinking, oh, you're the pastor. You know all this stuff. And they come to me with a life situation and I'm contemplating what they're dealing with in their life, and I'm thinking, oh, man, I don't know what to do here. That's a tough one, okay? I see that all the time. Now, here's the thing. Here's what I love about this. I don't know what to do about it, but I know somebody who does. I mean, Jesus. And Jesus says that if anybody will call my name, he will save them. He will work into their life. And so what I have to do is, my goal is not to give them the answer. My goal is to take them to the answer. Okay? And you can do that. Look at what Philip did. Apparently, he hasn't been following Jesus very long. Maybe a few days. Maybe a few weeks. It hasn't been that long. The verse earlier just said he got the call. It doesn't tell us the time frame here. And so he comes and he goes, and apparently he already knew that one of the trademarks of Jesus was, Jesus is not the only one who can make disciples. Jesus wants me to recruit other people. And so he starts doing this. He doesn't say, Jesus, I got this buddy you need to come see. He goes to Nathanael and says, we have found the Messiah. And his buddy says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Bealton? You know, he has this, what president has ever come from that area, okay? And Philip has an awesome answer. I love this. What does he say? Come and see. Does he try to argue with him? No, let me tell you, here's the verse in the Bible, and here's where it matches up with what I saw in you. Here's the verse in the Bible. Does he get it? No, he doesn't do that. Hey, come and see. All right, bring that question. I don't even know the answer to that, but bring that over here, and let's talk about that, okay? And so he brings him to Jesus, so they just start walking together to Jesus, and it says Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said about him, apparently, as Nathanael's getting close, because Nathanael heard this, Jesus says, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And apparently it was almost like what he's saying is like as the guy was coming closer, he was like saying, hey buddy, you look like somebody that's like the opposite of a hypocrite. And you look like a real Israelite. You're true down to the bone. You don't mess around. You don't put on a face. And Nathanael, again, skeptical, is like, what do you know about this? That's basically what he said here. How do you know? And Jesus says, before Philip called you when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Now, I don't know what that means, but he made some kind of reference that Nathanael all of a sudden went, this guy knows me. I don't know if he was praying under that tree. I don't know if he was praying, hey, I need a sign from God that what I'm supposed to do next. And then Philip walks up and starts talking about the Messiah, and then all of a sudden Jesus references this, and he was like, how did you even know I was praying like that? Like, I don't know. We don't know what this reference means. But somehow, Jesus said enough that Nathanael went, whoa, this guy knows me. He does know me. And because he knows me like that, he says, Rabbi, teacher, you're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel. Man, Jesus knows us like that. Now, I don't know how you became convinced of that. And I don't know what it's going to take for your friend to become convinced of that. But here's a couple takeaways from this passage. First of all, number 2, we cannot bring people to Jesus unless we are first followers. Now here's what we do sometimes. What does it take to be a disciple of Jesus? I need to follow Jesus. I need to be changed by him. I need to make disciples. Sometimes we try to jump and make disciples, and we're not really following Jesus, and we're not really being changed by Jesus. And what happens is our friends just know, why should I put everything into this if you're not really following Jesus? Like, you don't really believe that. Let me give you an example. Many, many years ago, I think it was our first year of marriage, Elaine and I had some friends, same stage of life. They just got married. They were married a few months ahead of us, and we would occasionally grab dinner and just do stuff. We're in a college town together, and one day we get this phone call, and first they said something to Elena, and I think it was the wife. She said something to Elena. She goes, "Hey, could you all next Saturday?" I don't remember. I'm making the dates up now because I don't remember the exact thing. But it was like, next Saturday, could you meet us at McDonald's at 5 o'clock for dinner? And I remember, and she's like, "Oh, okay. Well, let me check with that." And she says something to me. She goes, so and so, they want to meet us next Saturday at McDonald's at 5 o'clock. And I know as not nice as I am now, I was even less nice back then, okay? Jesus was still working on me. And so I was just like, that's weird. Because we just do stuff on the spur of the moment. And they're trying to make an appointment at a particular time to meet at McDonald's. And I said, that's weird. I said, what do they want to meet us? What's going on? Something's odd. And so Elena's like, Matt wants to know what's going on. We don't really tell you. We'll tell you when we get there. And then I got mean. I said, if they don't tell us what the deal is, I'm not coming. I said, because they're acting weird. I don't get it. These are friends of ours, and they're just acting stupid. I don't know, what's going on? All right. And they like, no, we'll tell you then. And I was like, I'm not going. And so we kept going back and forth, and then finally they were like, well, there's this business that we're in, and we were going to take. And I said, is it Amway? Well, we don't really want to. And it was Amway. All right, it was Amway. All right. Now here's the thing. I know some people that have got involved in Amway and did very good at it. Okay, so I'm not here to criticize Amway, but like here's what happened. Here's the backstory. They had been to something where they heard about Amway and they had signed up, and then their people told them, hey, look, what you need to do. You get a list of your friends. And then you invite them to go out to eat with you at a certain time. And I don't remember if they were going to have that other person there with them, or I don't remember or they had a brochure or something. And then you tell them, just like we told you, they told them how to tell us what they were supposed to do. Okay? And that apparently works for a lot of people, but it was a formula. And here's what I picked up on. My friend was very nervous. They were acting strange, okay? And they weren't being themselves. And so I'm like, if they just told us, hey, we're thinking about getting in this business, and come and let's talk about it or whatever, and not try to be all formal and follow the presentation, I would have been, you should really listen to it. I may or may not do it, I don't know, but like if you think it's good, we'll talk about it. But they didn't do that. Because they didn't do that, I knew something was off. So here's what, I just share with you. Sometimes when we think about, I got to make a disciple, we go, I got to learn a gospel presentation. I got to learn certain words. I got to follow this formula. And I can tell you this, like if you start acting weird and salesman-y, your friends are going to pick up on it. They're going to be like, I don't want to join Christian Amway or whatever it is. I don't want to do that, okay? And so, but here's the big thing. Here's the thing we forget about sometimes. You know what? If I had a friend who was really involved in a business, and they thought it was the killer business, it was the thing they wanted to do, but they needed some extra money to just like put it over the top. Now, I don't have a lot of money, okay? But like if they did, and they came and said, hey, I think I found the business. I love this. It's so amazing. It's going to change lives. It's going to do this. I think we're going to make money. Man, we need more money. Man, I know you don't have a lot, but like, if you have anything, I'll make you a partner. You can put your stuff into this. And like, if they were really into it, this was a friend of mine who I trusted and believed, I would consider it. But you know what the big part that I would consider is this? Are they really into this? If I found out like they'd only put in like a little tiny portion and they wanted me to do more than they wanted me to be more invested than they were, I'd be like, well, why did you put in all your money? Why are you holding back? What are you afraid of that I don't know about yet? Like, what's going on here? I will be as interested in being involved as you are. And you know what I think? Here's what some of us need to do. This is what we need in our witness is this. We got to be followers of Jesus. We have to be having him change us. He needs to become our everything. And to the degree that we are following Jesus, we can go to our friends and say, look, here's what I'm finding out about Jesus. Here's my everything. Here's what he's doing in my life. And here's the cool thing. You don't have to be following Jesus very long. You got to be following Jesus, but you don't have to be following Jesus very long. You can trust Jesus as your Savior right now and walk home and tell them to the degree that you just understood what happened in your life. And that's basically what Philip did here. Okay? Now, great, you'll learn some things along the way, but the goal of being a disciple maker is not learning all the answers to the big questions. Okay? I've had people share stuff with me that I have joined with them on, and they didn't know all the answers, but they say, well, I don't know, but like that guy, let's go talk to him. Let's find out about those things. Here's our third thing. We convince others that Jesus is the one by showing them that we believe Jesus is the one. Our worship makes the best witness. Is Jesus your one? I know some of you are going through hard times. You're grieving. You've lost somebody. How's Jesus becoming your one through that? You don't have to wait till you're on the other side of your troubles. You might not ever do that. How is Jesus your one? I remember, pick on Katrina for a second here. You had a great quote year or two ago. I don't remember when you said this, but you had somebody that was, you were talking about a conversation, and they were saying, well, Jesus is just your crutch. And how do you respond to that? What do you say? You remember? You're like, yeah, Jesus is my crutch, and I was just like, yeah, exactly. Like, sometimes it's like, yeah, Jesus is what I lean on. What do you lean on? Do you medicate yourself? Is that what you lean on? Do you have to have, some extra money? Is that what you lean on? If your latest love relationship is going well, then you're okay. Is that what you lean? What do you lean? Everybody leans on something. And for those of us following Jesus and saying we want others to do that, do we lean on Jesus? Is he our one? To the degree that we worship him and are consumed with him, that will impact our witness. All right, let's finish it up here today. Here's how we need to respond. So who is my one? You answer that question. Who is your one? Who's in the center of your life? What does everything else revolve around? Who is my one telling me to reach out to first? And this is assuming that Jesus is your one, because that's where it starts. But who has he touched your heart for? I love in this passage here that Andrew hangs out with Jesus one day and he goes and gets his brother Peter. I love that Philip, is told to follow Jesus, and right away he goes and finds Nathanael, who apparently was quite the skeptic, and just brings him to Jesus. He brings him to Jesus. I love that. Okay? I don't think any of us can be a disciple of Jesus very long at all until all of a sudden, if he's really our everything, we start realizing, man, I want my friends to meet my best friend. I want the people I care about to know the one who's helping me through life. And I want them to get together. I need to bring those parts of my life together. And so who's he telling you to reach out to first? Okay? Who's your one? Now, that's what these cards are for, is for you to actually put a name there and say, this is the one I'm reaching out to. Jesus is my one, and this is the one he's telling me to reach out to. We're not going to tell you how to determine who that is. We're going to let God guide you in that. I believe that he will. It may be a family member, co-worker, friend, whatever, but he's going to give you that one. So who's he saying, move this one to the top of your list, focus on that person there. And then finally, what would be one action that Jesus would have me do next? Jesus wants you to pray for that person, okay? Maybe you're going to use the prayer guide we have here. Maybe you're going to use the verses, maybe the app, whatever. Maybe you're not going to use any of that. But you're going to start praying about that person, praying to God for that person, that God will touch their heart. You better do that, okay? Because you wander in and try to help somebody with the God that you haven't talked to, you're going to have problems. You can't really help them. By the way, you don't save anybody. I don't save anybody. The only thing I can do is tell people where I found salvation. Bring people to the God who has worked in my life. I can't argue you to the cross. I can tell you about what Jesus has done for me. So maybe you're going to pray for them. Maybe you're going to be like me this last week and tell them that you're praying for them. Maybe you're going to ask some questions. So God, what's the next question I need to talk to them about? I'm going to share a meal together so I can get to know them better and we can talk about some of this. Maybe during that meal you're going to share the whole gospel. By the way, if some of you, if you've got a friend, a family member, somebody that you know pretty well, you've known them for years, and you have never shared the gospel with them, then it's time. Now, how's that going to look? There's a variety of ways. I mean, there are some presentations that help. Again, I don't want you to do Christian Amway, okay? But, I like using this. Because I'm comfortable with it. This fits me, and I'm familiar with it. We got some of these outside. There's another old track called the Three Circles. You don't have to do that. I've seen people write down stuff on a piece of paper. They'll draw a little bridge. And some people just open their Bible and turn to a couple verses. You don't have to fit my method, but you need a method. Because here's the thing. Sometimes we have friends who they're ready to trust in Jesus, and they're literally want a friend, not a preacher, not a spiritual professional person, but they want somebody just like them to say, how do I come to Jesus? They want a Philip. They want an Andrew just to say, how do I meet Jesus? What's that look like? And And you need to be ready to do that, okay? Now, if you want some help with that, that is the job of a pastor. My job is to equip you. So I'll help you with that, okay? But it's better coming from you. I want to equip you so that you can do this, okay? Maybe God's going to give you an opportunity to serve them in some way. Maybe there's something you can do for them or help them. Have you told them your God story? Maybe the first time you get together over dinner, first time in a while, you go, you know what? Man, we've been friends a long time, and I don't think I've ever told you about how I met the most important person in my life. You ever sat down at a dinner and somebody started talking about when did you meet your spouse? And then all of a sudden you go around the table and everybody's talking about when they met their spouse? I mean, that's fun, right? I mean, it's you learn something about somebody. Everybody enjoys that. You know, the spouses start arguing about how the story actually went. You know, it's really cool. You know, and anyway, it's good to do that. Well, and it's natural, right? You don't have a rehearsed thing like, no, honey, that's not how we tell the story. Okay, you know, you don't have it all rehearsed. You know the basics of the story, but it's part of you. Well, your God story. How did you meet Jesus? What was your life like before Jesus? How did you meet Jesus? You know, you ought to know how to tell that in a few minutes. The rough outlines of that. And let your friend ask some questions and just interact. But if you've never told your friend that story of how you met God, like, that needs to be on the table. They need to hear that. Okay? Invite him to church. I put that way down the list because I think these other things are somewhat more personal. Invite him to church. But maybe there's even something that's not even on this list that God is saying next week, this is what I want you to do. So that you can tell your one about that I'm the one. So here's what I encourage you to do. Go ahead and pull out your connection card right now. All right, go ahead and get it out. Some of you are sitting on it. Don't fold it there. And on the other side there where you make, what are my next steps? Who did God lay on your heart? Who's your one? Now, before we go there, is Jesus your one? You need to make Jesus your one. There's something you need to move off of the top shelf of your life so Jesus can be put there. But who is your one? Write that name down. If you would like to, I would encourage you to write it on this as well. This is, you're going to tear off. In a moment, when we sing our last song, for those of you who are ready to do this, some of you did this last week, would you just bring that little tab up here, and you can put it up here, because you're going to remember that name. It's just one name. And some of you put it where we can see the name. Some of you put it the other way. It's up to you. Okay? Put it up here. And what you're doing is you're saying, you know what, God, I'm going to be praying for them every day. And as you lead me, God, I'm going to bring that person to Jesus. Okay? I'm going to take the steps to bring him to Jesus. And then finally, whatever he's told you to do next, whatever that is, off of this list or something we didn't even mention today, this next week, will you do that? Will you do that? All right? Music team, go ahead and come on up. I'm going to pray. And as we sing, I want you to respond to God. Some of you in your hearts, you just need to have a conversation